Good morning, everyone. How is everyone on this fine, nice, warm day? We want to thank you all for coming out. As you should be aware, we have some very important changes coming up for CDL entry-level driving, or entry-level driver training. We brought the two experts in, and we want to thank them. I'll introduce them in a second for coming out on this day to help this. We want to get all the presentations done, and then what we'll do is we're going to open the floor up for questions that you'll have for either one. We want to keep it focused on the changes that are going to happen on February 7th. So, get ready, listen to the presentations. All right, my name, first of all, is Tom Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of the School Transportation Association. My job, along with Julie Thornley here, Julie runs the office, she just tells me what to do, so she's really the boss. We put these type of programs on for the members. We do the training for new school bus driver instructors, as well as the updated training that all instructors are required to have. So we do that. We run the summer convention down the Cape, along with a bunch of other programs that we do for all of our members. So if you're not a member, welcome. These are some of the things that we do for the members, and if you want to be a member, please see me or see Julie sometime during the day to do it. All right, as we know, on February 7th, which is less than a month, you're going to have a new process for your entry-level driver training, and Gretchen Daly, who is the Commercial Operations Program Coordinator for the RMV, and she's going to be working on all of that, the changes, implementing them, and I guess being available for questions for you after today. And Rich Bates, who is the District Administrator for the FMCSA. Thank you both very much for coming out on a Saturday. Not that we couldn't play golf today or anything, but we really appreciate it. We want to, hopefully everybody gets everything, all the information they need, their questions answered. And, we can make this as seamless and smooth for everybody, not only the owners, the instructors that are here, along with the federal level and the state level. And we want to be the best in the country in getting all this implemented. So, I also forgot Margaret Rohan. Everybody knows Margaret. She's going to be here. You must owe a lot of people money. They're clapping for you, Margaret. No. So she'll be available for presentation afterwards and questions as well, as it relates to all of this. So without any further ado, Gretchen, it's all yours.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for having us again to talk about entry-level driver training. We have quite a packed agenda today. I'll just review a little bit what we're going to be going over. We're going to talk about ELDT and how it came about and through the federal regulations. We're going to talk about the training provider registry, for which all training providers must register on if they plan to provide entry-level driver training. We're going to talk about what's required of drivers, new CDL holders in Massachusetts. There are various training requirements that we'll review. There are training provider requirements for you as the training provider, what your role will be and focus. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline and the countdown to the compliance date. I'm going to review what Massachusetts, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, has been doing to work towards the implementation of the new rule. I've compiled a group of frequently asked questions that have been asked of myself and then also have been posted on the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's dedicated training provider registry website. So there's a sample here that I'll go over, but throughout the presentation you'll see a link to that training provider registry website. There's a wealth of information. Has some great fact sheets, some of which we handed out today. Has various PowerPoint presentations that have been given in the past regarding the rule. Some tips for how to prepare for the compliance date and things of that nature. So, like I said, we'll touch upon that and share that link with you as we move along the presentation. Okay, so ELDT, the final rule. I'm going to have Rich is going to speak a little bit about where it came from, how entry-level driver came about, and what it means to Massachusetts and the nation for commercial drivers.
Morning, everyone. As we said, the ELD, February 7th, it's only a month away. If you've been in the industry, the CDL, the regulatory world for, well, as long as I have, 30 years, you'll know that ELDT is really not a new thing. Years ago, we published an ELDT rule that incorporated some things on hours of service, driver wellness, but it really didn't have the effect I think that we wanted it to. And, whereas this new ELDT, it pretty much standardizes things across the nation, sets a curriculum. You'll have better standards. And all those items that were in the previous ELDT, like, when we had driver wellness, well, it's not called driver wellness in the new rule. It's more or less ties it back to the regulation of Part 391 and medical standards, drug and alcohol testing, those types of things that really are the true driver wellness things to make sure that those individuals operating vehicles are medically qualified. There's talks about, hours of service, which depending upon really, I know the school bus industry, that's not a big issue, but it could be if you do, extracurricular trips or you have, other bus-related thing. Well, that's also included in the new ELDT when you'll see later on some of the curriculum where it talks about, routes, doing your trips within speed. So everything that was originally in the previous ELDT really is still there, but it's more specific tied back to the regulations. So in March of, or 2016,
Rich, you guys are...
oh,
Sorry.
I can't, sorry, I'm a walker.
To do it.
I'm a walker and a hand mover, so this is gonna kill me. All right, so in 2016, Congress passed the MAP 21 rule, which mandated the ELDT. And most of you if any of you operate motor coaches besides school buses, you'll know with MAP 21 there was also a 3-year requirement that you get visited every year. So MAP 21 was really a big reauthorization for us in various rules of, visiting passenger companies and establishing the ELDT. One thing it does is, like I said, there's always been an ELDT, or not always, but there has been previously. This standardizes and enhances it. So with our drivers that are on the road coming to you, because I'm sure in the past you have hired a driver and mentioned something, and I'll use an example of like, oh, you need to fill out a daily vehicle inspection report when there's a defect, and you've gotten that deer in the headlight look on anything, and all of a sudden it's like, we never did these at our previous company. And I'm just using that as an example. I'm sure you could probably think of 1,000 things that you brought somebody in, and all of a sudden you're like, you weren't doing this before? This is the first time you're seeing it. Well, this is what the ELDT does. It may not be, the training, you have limits on what you want to do, can't do, but this actually gives everybody an awareness that, if someone has gotten a CDL after February 7th and you mention something to them, they should at least be able to say, oh yeah, haven't done it, but I remember it was in that training that I had to take. That's really what this does, is it standardizes training across the nation for all CDL holders. Once again, like I said, sets the mandatory training. The other thing is, as you've noticed over the years, we've moved more towards the away from the local flair of things to national things. So we have the National Training Register. Kind of couples along with the medical registry, that drivers now can only go to doctors that are on that registry that have met the standards and understand the regulations. We have the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, which is another, nationalized program. And now we're going to have the ELDT, so that those individuals providing training will have to register. So once again, it's standardized, and it kind of gets away from the, Massachusetts does things. And having worked with and talked to Margaret for many years on school bus related things, Massachusetts has been ahead of the curve on, I think, training for years. And I think, and now there are things that, needless to say, we've had some conversations back and forth on, well, we do it this way, they do it that way. But this is going to be where you'll know that a New York driver coming to Massachusetts, maybe not the same hours, maybe not the same, criteria, maybe a different focus point, but you'll at least know that they've all been trained to a certain level, as well as the person that has done the training has gone through the process of registering to be on that provider where you can verify that information. How will it improve our safety? I've been said this already. Anybody getting an upgrade, A, B license, the different endorsements, there's training that goes along with it. National baseline training, standards that all training providers must meet. Give states information that they need a critical safety checkpoint. So once again, as I hear sometimes, well, state A is doing this different than state B, and so now, for being the United States, at one time we're not really all one big happy family when it comes to how we regulate our individual drivers. And once again, hopefully it ensures that the drivers operating the vehicles that they're licensed to have the knowledge and skills to actually operate that vehicle.
Okay, so we have the training provider registry. So this is a site, website and a process that has been set up by Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. For one, as I mentioned, the website itself has a lot of information about entry-level driver training, but it's also where you go to register. So any training provider, an entity that plans to provide entry-level driver training before that February 7th date has to go into this website, and I'll walk through a couple of the steps, but to register as a training provider. And that then students or trainees will have the ability to view the list and select a certified or a registered training provider to engage in training with. This is also, in the registry, is where once someone is trained in both theory and behind the wheel, that whoever's designated at the company or the training entity will go to enter that driver's information to indicate that they passed an examination for theory training at 80% or higher, and that they completed their behind the wheel range and road training. And at that point, the training provider is basically attesting to the fact that the person is proficient in the operation of a commercial motor vehicle. So the registration, the ability to register on the training provider registry opened this summer. We've seen a lot of Massachusetts training providers that have already registered, but you have up until the February 7th date to register. On the website, there's a registration guide that's available that you can download that can walk you through the process. And it's there's basically a three-step process of registering. You create a login.gov account, have a password for accessing the registry. You select someone to register the company or the organization with Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And then once that's approved, then that user can invite other individuals to register within the site. Yeah?
Just, I see this with a lot of other of our systems, especially like the portal, where if you want to check some of your information, make sure who's ever registering that you keep that information available, because sometimes we use the information or like an email address, and all of a sudden we'll send something, not so much to existing companies, but newer companies, and they'll be like, oh, that person no longer works with us. That email address isn't valid anymore. Well, that's what I'm saying. Who's ever registering, you might think like, oh, sure, I'll let whoever do it. But if whoever decides to retire or leave in a month, all the information, notification is going to that person. So before you just kind of say, oh, you register, then just make sure you pick the right person or that you have that account information available.
Right, and then that person becomes as like the administrator of the account. And then again, once the company registration is approved, then the provider can log additional locations. So there may be multiple training locations under one training provider. I think an example of that is some of the CDL training schools that I know, probably many of the school bus companies as well. And I spoke to this a little bit, but there is currently now a list of all the training providers that are registered. You can go to this TPR website. It's about halfway down the homepage where it says, do you need to find a training provider? And so, again, this is where I've been able to see that I think as of Monday or so, there was over, I think, 120 entities that have registered. And it's across, all the different types of training providers. So we have the CDL training schools, there are school bus companies that have registered, regional transit authorities, cities and towns that provide training, companies such as like at Eversource or National Grid that provide training. So again, that list is there. Once you register, you can verify that you're on, you've registered through that list. So again, if you haven't registered, please do so within the next, as soon as possible, so that the process is complete in the, for when you need to enter driver information going forward. So I think this is a great slide, and I've done many presentations on entry-level driver training, and I think this really gets to the point of the role of each individual or entity within this process, and how we're using the training provider registry. So again, if you're listed on the registry as being available trainer, either there's contact information if you provide training for hire and are welcoming trainees. Those entities, such as a school bus company that may train only employees or future employees, wouldn't have their contact information there to provide training to anyone. But again, the training provider registry is there for the driver to go, look at the list, see who's a registered trainer, and then select someone to train with. And so then that driver trainer, separate from this process, goes, engages with the training provider, completes their training, and then at that point, once training's completed, like I said, theory and then behind the wheel, both range and road, then the training provider electronically will submit the driver's information. So there's some data points, such first and last name, date of birth, license number, would enter that, again, indicating that the person took an exam for theory training and passed an 80% or higher, and again was proficient in the operation of a commercial motor vehicle, as shown through the range and behind the wheel training. At that point, then FMCSA is retaining that information within that site, and last, it makes that information available to the state to verify training's been completed. So the registry of motor vehicles, at the point at which someone is going to schedule a road test, or in the case of a hazmat endorsement, schedule a knowledge test, we are setting up, and I'll talk about this a little later into more detail, but we're setting up interfaces with this training provider registry so that when that scheduling is occurring, our system's going out to verify against FMCSA training provider registry that training has been completed. If we can't verify that, then the person cannot be scheduled at that time. Again, I think I covered these, but this is each individual stage of the process. CDL applicant searches on the training provider registry for a registered trainer. The training provider, once the trainee is trained, submits information to the site to make it available for the registry to verify. That information gets retained. And again, as I mentioned, prior to administering either the skills test for those for those applicants that are subject to a road test, we're checking it at the time of scheduling. And for a hazmat endorsement, when entry-level driver training is required, we're checking it before the knowledge test. Again, this is just another way of saying it, but who's going to access information from the training provider registry? The entry-level driver trainers are going to search it. The registered training providers are going to submit information, and the state, the RMV, is going to verify. Drivers themselves do not need to register on the training provider registry, only the training providers themselves. And when training providers do register, on the training provider registry, also called TPR, they're attesting to the fact that they're meeting all state and federal requirements. Okay, so who is subject to this training? So it's going to be, and I think the important thing to point out here is to remember entry level, so first time. So anyone who applies for a Class A or B permit on or after February 7th, 2022 is going to have to take entry-level driver training. Anyone upgrading from a Class B to a Class A CDL on or after February 7th, 2022 is going to be subject to entry-level driver training. Anyone who is adding a hazmat endorsement, a passenger endorsement, or a school bus endorsement for the first time on or after February 7th, 2022 is going to have taken entry-level driver training. So we'll talk about this throughout because I think it's important to understand who's subject to the training and who's not. So if I get my permit on February 6th, 2022, I am not subject to entry-level driver training. I do not have to take entry-level driver training. If I get my permit on February 7th, I have to take entry-level driver training in order to qualify to take my skills test or the knowledge test in the case of hazmat.
You take the permit, and then you get the second permit after the first 6 months. Do you still fall in under the prior to February 7th?
Yeah, as long as the permit does not lapse.
Okay.
Yep. So I think everyone heard the question, maybe. So a permit is good for 6 months, and then it can be renewed. So as long as someone keeps even if they get the permit on February 6th, and then there's going to be a renewal period, once they renew, it doesn't make them, they're not subject to entry-level driver training because for the first time they got their permit was before the compliance date. And again, I think the third bullet is the most important. Whether or not a driver is subject to entry-level driver training regulations is determined for when they obtain their commercial learner's permit or any pre-existing endorsement. This is a good slide, and it just kind of shows kind of the line in the sand of the compliance date, February 7th. Like I just said, drivers holding the permit before the compliance date are not subject to entry-level driver training. I think to Wayne's question, if the permit was obtained prior to the compliance date or renewed, but expires before obtaining a CDL, the driver would be subject to ELDT. If the driver already holds a school bus passenger or hazmat endorsement prior to the compliance date, they're not subject to entry-level driver training. Drivers who obtain a commercial learner's permit on or after compliance date are subject to entry-level driver training, and drivers who get the SP or H endorsement for the first time on or after that date are subject to entry-level driver training. What must drivers do to meet entry-level driver training requirements? Again, they're completing training with a registered training provider, and that will make them eligible to be able to take the skills or knowledge test. And if we as the agency, RMV, cannot electronically verify that the requirements are met, then we would not be permitted to administer the skills or the knowledge test. So this may be some cases. So you think about recently when you're getting a driver's license and you have to prove lawful presence. So there's certain checks that we do at that point to validate information the documentation that is being received. And oftentimes, sometimes the site could be down, and we'd potentially have to turn someone away. But this kind of falls into the same category. So if we can't electronically verify this, then we can't move forward. We don't anticipate that happening, but I just wanted to make people aware that this is an electronic, like I said, interface where we're reaching out to that TPR and looking for the information there to pull back in order to move forward with the customer's transaction. All right, what are ELDT training requirements? Entry-level drivers must receive training and demonstrate proficiency in the following areas. So as today, training is given, both there's the classroom or theory training that's provided to trainees, and there's the behind-the-wheel, both range and road training that occurs. So theory training is the lectures, demonstrations. There's a requirement that someone must take on an assessment or an exam provided, must pass at an 80% or higher. All of the topics or content that need to be covered as part of the training, both theory and behind the wheel, are within the federal regulations, 49 CFR Part 380, Appendices A through F. And so, yep, and we have a slide too, but it's 49 CFR Part 380, Appendices A through F. So Appendix A is the content topics that need to be covered for Class A, CDL. The Appendix B is for Class B. Appendix, and so on. I think C is for the passenger endorsement. D is for school bus endorsement, and I'm not exactly sure what the hazmat endorsement, but again, it's very clearly outlined within those appendices what the topics, content, and what has to be covered, the different modules. So you can see here some are listed around basic operation, safe operating procedures, advanced operation procedures, vehicle systems, non-driving activities. So again, clearly outlined within that appendix are the things that should be covered as part of training. And the examination or assessment that you're providing to the trainee, should make sure that you're asking questions so that it's indicating that they're proficient in their understanding of what was taught through the training. Behind the wheel training, as you know, as the actual operation of the CMV, it's both range and road. A simulator cannot be used. There are no minimum number of hours, but the training provider is the person that will determine the driver's proficiency. And basic vehicle control skills and basic maneuvers should be covered. And again, within those appendices that I mentioned, that's broken out to specifically the areas that have to be covered for theory, the areas that have to be covered for range, and the areas that have to be covered for road. This just points out that theory and behind-the-wheel training could be delivered by two different training providers. Both would have to be registered on the training provider registry, the TPR, and both separately, training providers would have to submit information of the passing of the ELDT training. If it's behind-the-wheel training for range and road, that must be provided by the same training provider. And trainees must complete both theory and behind-the-wheel portions of the training within 1 year of one another.
The same provider or the same system? So if we have two people doing the training working for one school system, can both those people do the road information or just one?
So the question is about if there's two different people providing behind-the-wheel training?
Yes.
Under one entity. As long as it's under that registered entity, then that would be fine. This is what I covered where we talked about the appendices A through F in Part 380 of the federal regulations of what topics need to be covered. There's a question on the last slide. So, the question is about the first bullet in that it says that instructors must cover the topics listed in the federal regulations and then determine and document that each driver trainee has demonstrated proficiency in all elements of behind-the-wheel curriculum. I believe that's just your whatever records you're keeping, training records that they completed the various topics and maneuvers that are listed. Margaret.
I was just going to say, we already document all training and we continue and we audit all training. So I didn't think that was going to be changing. Okay.
Shouldn't.
So everything you're doing now is correct. As long as you're compliant with everything here that Gretchen is speaking about, you'll just record everything as you always do. Okay?
Yeah, I think it's important too, I think what Margaret just said is that not a lot's changing in terms of that you provide training, you provide the classroom and theory training, you provide behind the wheel training. You probably covering the topics that are listed in the regulation. What's different is that if you're a training provider, you're registering on the federal training provider registry site. And once someone completes training, you're indicating that through electronically on the TPR. And then we're just verifying the training's complete for those individuals that are subject to the training at the time we're scheduling a test. So those are really the three changes. You register on the site, you enter the trainee information on the site, and then as a state, our one change is that we're making sure that anyone that's subject to the training has taken it before we're allowing a road or knowledge test in the case of it hazmat.
One of the most arduous parts of training is getting the previous state's records if they've lived anyplace other than Massachusetts. Will this federal registry alleviate that so we no longer have to supply New York or California driving records? Puerto Rico?
The question is regarding the difficulty sometimes in getting driving records from other states that a driver may have been licensed. And so that's not covered under this rule. So we'll move on to the next section, and that was regarding what do the ELDT regulations require of training providers. So this is where we have Rich talk about this, but it's all the different various areas where you're following the federal curriculum, you're keeping documentation, record retention and such. But I'll let Rich take from there.
And I'm just going to step away from the program just for a second. And Gretchen knew I was going to mention this at one point with the Massachusetts about the junior operator's license. My nephew turned 16 roughly a year or so ago, went for his training, went to the driver's school, which I'm originally from Pennsylvania. So, I don't know, like I said, when we say Massachusetts, school bus wise, training wise, has always been ahead of the curve compared to some other states. So, I don't know how it was when you grew up. You went to the barracks, you read your book, got your permit, made an appointment, got your test, somewhere in between. Your parents, your friends took you out for some training. Your father came home, threw the keys on the counter and said, I'm never taking you out again. That's how it was for my licensing, okay? Fast forward X number of years, my nephew pretty much has some driver school. My son turned 16 this December. Signed him up. My wife does all the stuff, says, okay, there's, so many hours of driver education he has to take. I'm like, I'm okay with that. Then, there's so many on the road observation that has to be recorded. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. Still sounding like a lot more than what my nephew in Pennsylvania just recently did, or what I did. And then she goes, oh, and yeah, by the way, there's a 2-hour parent class. I said, excuse me? I have to take a class now for my son to get his license? So, and those are the standards that Massachusetts has. ELDT, kind of keeping it in the line of what you know of for junior operator and licensed masters. Think of ELDT as a huge junior operator license nationwide. So, like I said, Pennsylvania is different than this. And I can tell you one of the things that, wasn't covered in Pennsylvania at one point, or I glanced over it, was rotaries. I moved to Maine on my first job. There was a rotary right in Augusta, Maine. I'm finding out that if I go more than 2, I have to be on the inside. I have to yield to this. I'm thinking, never had any rotaries in Pennsylvania. So ELDT, like I said, in simple terms, other than like those 3 things that Gretchen just mentioned, the registry, kind of the standard curriculum and the verification on the licensing part, think of it as junior operator license nationwide, whereas where Margaret's saying, in Massachusetts, you may have been doing a lot of this already. not a lot of it's going to change. There may be a few things that, you know, as we talk about the curriculum, you're like, oh, well, we haven't really spent, we touch on that, maybe a word. Well, maybe now it's a 10-minute session that you need to do. But it's nothing that is really, from your standpoint, that's going to be, oh my God, we're not going to be able to do this. February 8th, I want to hire a new driver, we're going to have to shut down. No, probably the biggest part will be, like I was saying before, getting on to register if you want to be an ELDT provider. So, all right, that was my kind of junior operator license comparison to ELDT, to kind of just give you an idea of really what because I mean, with any regulation, it's overwhelming at first. Oh my God, we have this, we have that. And as you know, the other passenger car license places in Massachusetts have been registered with the registry or licensed. So there's been things like that going on for years in Massachusetts. This is just an enhancement probably to the overall driver licensing program within the Commonwealth. All right, so what is the training provider? So when we talk about it, it's anybody that's actually going to provide training. So it's the training schools, it's employers, it's educational, could be individual companies, applies to local governments, you know, your municipalities, school districts, owner-operators, individuals. So really what this does is it standardizes. So if you know, the way I look at this, kind of back to the Pennsylvania story, my dad can no longer be my provider to get the green check mark unless he goes into the system and registers as an ELDT. That's really the big group that's going to get impacted by anybody that pretty much would train their own, say, family, you know, with in-house type things. Unless they become registered, they can still do the training by all means. That's, you know, that's the equivalent of me having to give my son his on-the-road thing. That's still training, but at the end of the day, the registry is not going to accept 40 hours by Rich Bates as my son's training provider to get his license. They're going to need some other certificate passing. That's what ELDT is. So if you're already providing training, the key for you is to just register as the provider. If you're, you know, like I said, the person that, you know, like, oh, moving up through the ranks, Gretchen's coming to work for me, I'm going to train Gretchen. Like I said, I can give her all the training I want, but when she wants to go get her CDL, the registry's going to look and see if the person's on the list, and there's that, whatever, green check mark, okay. So like I said, anybody who's providing training can be a provider. The requirements, I think we talked about this. You know, you need to register, there's certain curriculum you now need to cover, you know, instructors need to have so much experience, the proper licensing, you know, you need the facilities, the vehicles have to be safe and up to standards, and the proper, vehicles, you know, you're not going to get somebody, you know, for a tractor trailer license and train them in a pickup truck, okay? State licensing, assessments, we talked about that, you know, the 80%, the testing, the training certification, documentation in the event that, you know, what you're maintaining now, Margaret mentioned it, nothing's changing. And then, and before anybody asks me on the FMCSA audit side, I don't have an answer on that. Needless to say, there are things that, you know, most likely what would happen is if, you know, when you look at, say, how someone could be decertified, you know, if we get a complaint that somebody is rubber stamping things, documents are missing, you know, one of the criteria is, you know, if everybody who comes out of the school passes the CDL test at the registry. Those would probably be the things that would trigger an FMCSA audit, where then we would come in and ask, like, okay, who's your instructors? How many years? Where's the paperwork that you mentioned that you have, the testing? So, you know, do not think, like I said, as I mentioned before about the MAP 21, every 3 years, some of you have seen us. Do not think that if you're an ELDT provider that, you know, we're going to be knocking on your door every year in addition to any other reason we might be there. But like I said, that's yet to be ironed out. But that's just one of those items that's part of the whole process. Registering, it's on the website, the regulations. To be authorized, you know, you need to self-certify that you meet all the federal and state requirements. The only registered training providers will be listed on the registry website, which is publicly viewable. It says late 2021. It's available now, in the middle of the page. Be able to submit driver training certification information to FMCSA. That's, kind of the uploading the information to the registry so that the state can verify that the person has met that criteria. Training providers are required to register, even if they do not provide training to the general public. So this kind of goes back to, we know of driver training schools, which anybody could go to, and you pay for that. But this is also saying if you are an internal provider, you train your own people, that even if you do that, you have to be registered as a provider. Curriculum, Gretchen mentioned this, the A through E. No required minimum number of hours that you have to go to. You just have to cover all the topics.
Except for, sorry, I was going to step in.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I think the exception here is that in Massachusetts, in order to get the school bus certificate, there are the minimum required hours of 60 hours.
Okay.
That have to be.
Yeah, I mean,
So state.
yeah, keep in mind, I know it was on a slide, I don't know if it's in somewhere in it. None of this is going to preempt state regulation. Similar, like you said, any of you that have school bus, if I'm not mistaken, there's still the requirement once a year, medically qualified. Federal standards, 2 years. Okay, so anything that we mentioned in this is not going to alleviate a state existing requirement. So as Gretchen said, if there's you need to so if we cover items A through Z, and the state says, oh, we want double A and double B, well, guess what? You need double A and double B to satisfy the state requirements, which falls into this. We do not go, oh no, A through Z, that's all. No, so that's fine. Separate training providers, I think Gretchen mentioned this, may deliver theory and behind the wheel, but both portions of behind the wheel training have to be done by the same provider. Driver trainees must complete both the theory and behind portions within 1 year of each other, except for individuals seeking the hazardous material endorsement. And a simulation device cannot be used for behind the wheel instruction. It can be used as part of your theory, but for behind the wheel, it means behind the wheel. Instructors, I think we touched on this, need to have this CDL, all the endorsements for the vehicles or class that you're training someone, 2 years of experience, 2 years behind the wheel as an instructor, which I think, Margaret, I think that's a standard now in Massachusetts. So this is nothing that's like earth-shattering. If an instructor's CDL has been canceled, suspended, or revoked due to offenses, the instructor is prohibited from teaching for 2 years following the date of his or her CDL is reinstated. Probably a good thing. Probably not exactly the instructor you want to have if someone's CDL gets suspended for a reason. You'd probably want to relook that anyway. Facilities, common sense types thing. Classroom range facilities must comply with all federal, state, local statutes and regulations. Range means an area that is free of obstructions, adequate sight lines, enables the driver to maneuver the vehicle, free from other vehicles and hazards. Training providers may conduct behind the wheel range training in an area that meets the 3 above requirements. They're not required to maintain or rent a private facility or space, so you don't need to go out and buy something. If you can find something that meets that criteria, you're fine. If a range of training is conducted in a publicly accessible area, all the CLP requirements also apply. Vehicles, more or less, have to meet state, federal standards, so, no flat tires, state inspections, and it has to be the proper category of vehicle that the person's being tested in or trying to obtain that CDL for. State licensing, this kind of goes, training providers must be licensed, certified, registered, or authorized by the state where the training is conducted. So, if you need to have a state certification or something on that line, then you still need to do it. If training provider offers theory instruction only online, the state licensing requirements do not apply. So I think this kind of gets into, I know there's some slides, and I think there's frequently asked questions about, crossing state lines. This is kind of the online portion. In this day and age, I could take a class at the University of California, that kind of concept. Assessments, training providers must use assessments in written or electronic format to determine the trainee's proficiency with the units that they're teaching, have to earn a minimum overall score of 80%. Behind the wheel training must evaluate and document a trainee's proficiency in behind the wheels, similar to what you're doing now. Training instructors must document the total number of clock hours Sounds similar to what I was saying about my son and the junior operator license, as far as, I have to document what I do with him as well as the school does with him to complete the behind the wheel curriculum. But the difference is there's no minimum number of hours for that. Driver training certification. The following training certification information must be submitted to the training provider registry by midnight of the second business day after each student completes training. So there is a timeline with this. So when someone passes something, you have by midnight of the second business day to get that information uploaded. So this isn't, I'll train somebody on the first of the month, and then by, the end of the month, so-and-so comes in, and I'll have them upload the information. Kind of goes back to what I was saying. Whoever's going to be registering on any of our things, make sure they're the people that utilize the system and update it. And the items that need to be uploaded: person's name, date of birth, license number, the class of license, the specifics about the type of training they completed, score on the theory assessment, total number of clock hours, and date of the successful completion of the training, which, unless I'm missing something, probably should be either the day before or that day if we're trying to do it by the second business day at midnight. Training providers who routinely fail to comply with the requirement may be subject to the removal of the training provider registry in accordance with 380-721A1. Documentation. Once again, this kind of gets into the assessment aspect of it, training providers have to retain specific documents. You're going to self-certify, but with that, you're going to also attest that you're complying with all the state, federal regulations as far as, controlled substancing, age, medical certification, licensing, and driving record, copy of the trainee's CLP or CDL, instructor qualification documentation, lessons plan for theory and behind the wheel training, so pretty much your coursework, your curriculum, your agenda, your route map, whatever you have now for, that you're using to determine what what materials you're covering during both aspects. You have to, and the assessments, and then you have to keep them for 3 years. Back to the audits, like I said, training providers must allow us to come in. If you don't, then pretty much we'll just remove you from the registry. As you well know, at some point, as you've dealt with us in the past, you can say yes, no, but sooner or later there are consequences. So, like I said, we're, as with anything, always willing to work with somebody, but ultimately, if someone is stonewalling us, then chances are you're just going to be removed from the registry. Once again, I think I talked about some of these things before. If you're not meeting all the applicable requirements, kind of like what we just talked about before, what's your curriculum, what's your route plan, how are you training the providers, what hours are you doing? Those are the things that we would be looking for. Needless to say, can't be training someone if you're removed from the registry. Training providers who wish to remain listed on it may appeal to our decisions. As with anything, there's never anything that's a final, on this day something happens. And even with any government action, whether it be your license, your registration, unfortunately, if you ever get a penalty from us, there's always the due process time period. No, in very rare circumstances, and those are usually related to like imminent hazard type things, does the state or the federal government pretty much say, it's done now. Everything else is a time frame. So similar to this, if for some odd reason paperwork wasn't available or it was misplaced and you got with this process, there's an appeal. And like I said, once again, back to the thing, if we ask for stuff, you have to provide it. Maintaining registration, this kind of goes, like I was saying, back to, make sure who's ever going into the system is the person that actually has access to it, because if something changes, you need to go in and change that information. Address, phone number, what types of your training you're doing, where your state is. Like I said, a lot of times we see, we moved, you didn't inform us. So like I said, that's, 30 days, update your information. Biennial update, similar to right now with the DOT number, you need to file that every 2 years just to make sure that, our information's the same. Same model with this, we're the same agency, we don't get creative with dates. 2 years, biennial. Gretchen's laughing. So, pick a date, update your information, even if it hasn't changed, we're still looking for that. Because that would be one of those little things that, at 2 years, 6 months, either my office locally or you'll be getting a letter going, hey, you failed to update your biennial update and we're going to remove you from the registry, and you're going to go, what do you mean? We've been doing everything all along. And then, you're going to call my office because we're the local ones, and we're going to look and we're like, yeah, you were supposed to update your ELDT registry information on, February 10th, and you didn't. That's so, like I said, put a little reminder in your calendar, update your information if you're going to be registered. Countdown? Yeah. It's coming. This slide's an old slide. We start with summer 2021. We're past that. Fall 2021, we can skip that one too. Pretty much today's the 8th, right? So we're less than 30 days away. So, like I said, the key to this is if you're going to register, get registered. Or if you're planning to register, then register after the fact. I mean, the issue is, as of February 7th, you can't. I mean, you can register on the 10th. The issue is if you want to provide training and, have that count towards this process, you have to be registered. So it's not as though February 7th is it, but you just, like I said, so February 7th, it's going to happen. Get ready to register. Like I said, a lot of this begins summer 2021. These are old slides at this point, so we're well into the lightning round now. All right, get ready. This is the thing. So on February 7th, manual submission, all training providers will be able to manually enter driver information using the online form, or there's an optional training providers with their own IT systems can set up a web interface to submit data via a TPR web service.
I think there's more information about it too. Yes.
I hope so. TPR web service. Submission option may be good fit for training providers that anticipate submitting a significant number of driver training certifications on a regular basis, have an existing IT system to track driver training results, have an IT support team that can update your IT system to interface with the TPR web service per the technical specifications in the Web Services Development Handbook. And if you're interested in this, absolutely go to that link. Because I can tell you right now, I am not the IT guy to answer any of the questions you may have, as if you come up afterwards and go, well, we have this system that we use. Will that work? I don't know. I'm more the enforcement regulatory person than the IT person. So, like I said, if you think you have a system or you're going to fall into this, if there's one website you want to go to, that would be the one to see if your system works.
Yeah, and I would say, that website to see the toolkit for if you think that you can create a web service between whatever system you're using and TPR. There's also on that website, the TPR website, ability to contact someone. There's a contact button in the top right-hand corner that you can submit a question or an email, and they're very responsive in getting back to people that have questions and inquiries about the new rule. I'm going to shift to talk a little bit about what the RMV is doing in order to prepare for this implementation and go-live date on February 7th. So I'd say it's a combination of doing communication outreach, training our staff, making sure we had the regulations updated to include entry-level driver training. So we adopt federal regulation, but it's always also nice and clean to have the requirement within our own state regulation as well. And then also they're making all of the necessary system changes, as I mentioned before, in order to interface with the TPR to, again, verify training completion at the different points at which we've determined. Our website is mass.gov/RMV. I should have put it here, but we've added entry-level driver training content to our website, and not just its own dedicated page, but I've also added information on our pages where someone would go to who's interested in applying for a commercial learner's permit. So there will explain that if you're applying for this, based on the date, if you're subject or not subject to ELDT. Also on the page that talks about scheduling a skills exam or road test, CDL road test, I also put information there about entry-level driver training. So if someone does go to that site to schedule, they'll be aware of the fact that they wouldn't be able to schedule had they not taken entry-level driver training, if in fact they are subject to it. I've held several webinars with the commercial industry. I have a growing list of stakeholders, again, to include the various organizations, commercial organizations in Massachusetts, STAM being one of them, but also TAM, the Trucking Association of Massachusetts, the Mass Municipal Association. We have the CDL training schools. We have regional transit authorities, again, the companies that we know train in-house. And I've just continued to build that. So we did send out an email yesterday. I know TAM shared it with their membership. I think Tom's saying that it was shared with STAM membership as well. And so that's just another opportunity similar to what we're presenting today. But I just wanted to make sure, again, people aren't surprised by the February 7th date, that we've done everything we can to make people aware of this new requirement. And so, we held on May 5th a webinar, again on September 29th, and then we're holding our third RMV run webinar on upcoming Wednesday, January 12th. We also am working to revise the preface of the CDL manual to include the entry-level driver training requirement as well, so that, again, if someone's interested in becoming a commercial driver, and we always direct them to that CDL manual to look at to begin with, that ELDT requirement is also listed there. Again, I mentioned the regulatory change, so 540 CMR 2.0 speaks to commercial driver requirements. And so we did add the entry-level driver training requirement there as well. There's a public hearing in August of this year, and the regulations went into effect on October 1st. As far as training, again, I mentioned there's going to be 2 points of interface or web services that we create that are currently in our staging environment, but will move to production with the go-live date. But we need to train our staff, one, across the agency, because there'll be questions that come in through our contact center, at our service centers, into our driver licensing department, into my commercial operations team. And so we want to make sure if someone's calling about a question regarding entry-level driver training, that people are aware of it and can also provide information or direct the caller or customer to the right area to get the information they need. So I reviewed some training material yesterday. We have some specific areas, so for the contact center, for our service centers, and then again, like I said, internally, our back office folks. And then as far as the system updates, so for hazmat, so that does not, new hazmat endorsement does not require a road exam or a skills test, only a knowledge test. So our core system is Atlas, our licensing and registration system. And so at the time of someone coming in to request a hazmat exam, to add a hazmat endorsement to their license, we've added this validation that the entry-level driver training has to be completed and verified based on the criteria of the driver. So mainly, when are they adding the hazmat endorsement? Is it on or after that date? And then, the various messages that will come back. So either someone would be able to move forward if we can verify the training, or again, we'll provide information to the driver. If one, it says that they haven't completed the entry-level driver training, or there may be cases where they have completed it, but the training provider hasn't updated the information in the TPR site yet. So we see there might be cases where someone's anxious to get their endorsement or their license and take their road test, and so that's why I think that we put the federal government has or the federal regs have that criteria in place that you have to update by midnight of the second day. And then in Massachusetts, we use what's called CSTMs, the Commercial Skills Test Information Management System. And so that's where all of the CDL road tests are scheduled. There's individuals on my staff that work within that system that take the phone calls from customers who are requesting a road test. And also there's online requests that they work through. And so that system is also, will have the interface to the TPR. And in Massachusetts, we made the decision to verify the training has been completed before we'll schedule the road test. So again, like Rich said, it actually is like a green check mark that you get, or a red X if that person's subject to the training or not. So all that's underway, being tested. We have our QA folks testing in the testing environments, and again, just getting prepared to move these changes into production by the compliance date. So I just want to talk about a little bit about where you can go with questions and the resources that are available to you. And then after this, I'll go into the frequently asked questions that we've assembled. And then again, we'll open it up to open questions. But this is the website. This is where a ton of great information is held. tpr.fmcsa.gov.dot.gov. Here, one nice feature, and I hadn't thought about it until I just read this again, but you can sign up to get email updates from Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So I'm signed up as a state driver license agency, and so as things change or come up or reminders, I get emails directly from FMCSA. You can also do that. There's a selection at the top when you want to receive an email. What type of entity are you? So you can get specific emails for training providers. Again, great list of frequently asked questions by user and role, and other countdown materials, things to get you prepared for ELDT. At the bottom, you can see there's the fact sheets. There's a checklist. There's a really good, we talked about the curriculum and having to cover the topics and content that's in those appendices, but there's a good summary that's available on that website as well. So you have that Train Provider Registry website. Again, there's a contact option there if it's specific to the Train Provider Registry. Other questions regarding entry-level driver training or provider questions in terms of at a state level and our involvement, those can go to our RMV CDL at dot.state.ma.us email. There's also a contact number there for my staff in commercial operations that could answer questions. So these are frequently asked questions. Again, like I said, I think I drew some from previous webinars that I've had, some of the questions that have come up from participants. I drew some questions that I thought were relevant to this group from the TPR website, but I figured we could go through these and then likely would answer some of the questions that you probably have, and then, like I said, we'll open it up. So what will the state minimum number of hours for theory and behind-the-wheel portions of entry-level driver training be? So again, with the exception of school bus certificate applicants, there is not a set minimum number of hours that we're requiring or that the federal regulations are requiring for the theory and behind the wheel. So that's the determination of the training provider for what they feel is necessary in order to cover all the content. But again, I know in Massachusetts we have the total number of hours of training for a school bus are 60 hours. There's the 32 behind the wheel training, and there's a minimum of the 28 of classroom training that have to be. Again, this is the question around who's subject to entry-level driver training. So if a driver has had their license, CDL, for years ago, let it expire, and then come back to obtain a CDL, a new CDL, they're not subject to entry-level driver training because it's not their first time getting the license. Okay? So it's just new to you, the first time. First time getting a Class A or Class B permit, first time upgrading from a B to an A, or first time getting a hazmat passenger or school bus endorsement. This is a question around, do instructors, each individual instructor need to register on the TPR? So that's not required. It's the entity that is registering on the site. There could be multiple users within one entity that can be added, but it's not every single instructor or trainer has to be listed or registered there. This is a question around, if I have a Class B CDL with no endorsements, and I want to upgrade to a passenger and school bus endorsement, do I only have to do the passenger and school bus specific training or the entire entry-level driver training program? And so this is just indicating that this person, because they have an existing CDL, if they're adding the endorsements, they'd only have to do the training for those specific endorsements. So the theory and behind the wheel portions for the P and S endorsement, and there are separate appendixes within that federal regulation, Part 3A that I talked about, that are specific to getting an S endorsement or getting a P endorsement, as the same as there's a specific appendix for the topics that we cover for someone getting a hazmat endorsement. This question touches back on the requirement to enter the trainee information within a certain time frame. So if the final test score is entered on Monday at 3, then do the scores need to be entered by midnight Tuesday night / Wednesday morning, or midnight Wednesday night / Thursday morning? And so again, just to reiterate that training providers have until midnight of the second business day after the driver trainee completes training to electronically submit entry-level driver training certification, to the TPR. So for this example, training certification would have to be submitted by midnight on Wednesday. The assessment for behind the wheel, is that 80%? So no, it's just the assessment that's done for the theory training that has to be passed at a level of 80% or higher. For the behind the wheel, the assessment of the driver trainee's proficiency in performing the required driving maneuvers is based on the training instructor's professional judgment. And so that's just, again, when you're going back into the registry to indicate that someone has completed training, you're testing the fact, again, that they passed at the 80% or higher, entering that grade, but then also testing the fact that the person is proficient in behind the wheel of a operation of a commercial motor vehicle. Who can provide entry-level driver training? Rich talked about this. It's only training providers listed on that training provider registry are the entities that can provide training required under this rule. And so in order to comply with the regulations, drivers must select training provider only from those listed on that training provider registry. And again, training providers are attesting to the fact that they meet federal and state requirements as part of registering for that. What prevents a driver trainee from entering their own results of successful completion of entry-level driver training if they didn't actually complete the training? So this is just a question around, the answer is that driver trainees don't have access to submit information to the training provider registry. Only those training providers who have registered with FMCSA and have been issued an identification number will be able to enter information. Question around, is there a mandatory sequence that specific theory and behind-the-wheel training must be taken in? So there's no mandatory order in which it has to be completed, but again, you have to have a commercial learner's permit before you can do any of the behind-the-wheel training, and usually it makes sense that the order in which the classroom would be done to inform the trainee of certain requirements and information before the behind-the-wheel would be conducted. This is a question around an applicant that domiciled in State A, receives entry-level driver training, and passes a skills test in State B. Can can a CDL applicant domiciled in State A receive entry-level driver training and pass the skills test in State B? Yes. So in accordance with the federal regulation, if a driver is domiciled in State A, obtains training in State B, passes the skills test admitted in State B, State A can accept the skills test results from State B of the driver skills testing requirement. I think we touched upon this probably already a lot, but this is just asking what will prompt an audit from FMCSA. Will it be random? Too many skills test failures from a particular site? And so again, just as one of the requirements that training providers must meet in order to be listed on the TPR is to allow an audit or investigation of their operations. So I think, Rich, we covered this, I think, already, but if there's people want more information, we can talk about it after. Will FMCSA provide any training materials for the various entry-level driver training curricula in the final rule? So Federal Motor Carrier does not intend to provide written or electronic training materials for the curriculum. The training providers themselves would work from the federal regulations that list the topics and content that have to be included in your curriculum. An applicant for Class B CDL with a school bus and passenger endorsement, domiciled in State A, obtains an entry-level driver training for Class B, S, and P endorsements and passes a skill test in State B. Can State A require the applicant to meet additional standards to obtain the S endorsement? So I put this on here because, yes, we as a state have a higher standard for school bus operators in that there's the minimum hours that have to be trained, the 60 total hours. So there's the opportunity that if someone coming from another state, if they haven't met our own state requirements, would have to meet that level before being licensed.
On the trainer provider registry, do each one of my trainers get registered or just my facility?
You can have multiple users, but you only really need one person from your entity to be able to log on. You register the training provider entity, and then you can add other users, but you don't have to add every instructor or trainer.
So what if I'm registered and she's providing the, let's say, behind the wheel training for them, or the classroom, I would enter what she gives me?
Yes.
Yeah, key word is, you mixed it up. The registered is the provider. Don't think of the person providing the training as the provider.
Okay.
That's, the thing is, when we say registered provider, that's the one person. Then it can branch all the way down, but it's still the one. It's kind of back to the original question of,
multiple things or whatever. It's one provider. So like, Corporation A has 7 vice presidents, but it's still Corporation A.
All right.
So
my next question is, as a school district, I would open up only training to my people that I'm going to hire. There's a way for me to opt out on there so that I'm not getting phone calls from calling going, hey, I want to get my CDL, can I come down and
Yeah.
train? Okay.
I think so, yes.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a not-for-hire training provider, meaning like train in-house,
Yeah.
then your contact, you select that as part of the process, and your contact information is not listed publicly.
Okay.
And then do they have to, they register the business, the district, the business, however they are, and then do they have to register all of their trades?
No.
If they're not registered as a trainer, can they do a road test like that?
If they're not registered as a trainer, can they do the road test?
Yeah, trading, yes.
So it's just your company that has to register.
Just the company and not each individual trainer.
Yeah, see,
No.
there's the question there. So do instructors of entry-level driver training need to register? No, instructors that are hired by registered training providers do not need to register in the training provider registry. Additionally, training providers do not need to provide the names of instructors when registering. Okay, does that answer that? And then
Go back to 37 slide, just.
You can still give a road test though, right?
A road test.
So currently, when someone goes up for a road
The road
they have to be
training.
with a certified instructor
Oh.
who's done the training.
Yeah, it could be a sponsor, yes.
Now, if I'm a bus contractor or a business and I have multiple locations, do I have to register each location?
Yes, after you get approved for your first registration, then you do multiple location. So I've seen that, like, there's a school bus company that's on the registry right now that has probably 5 locations.
Is there some type of universal assessment test that you guys have written up that we can use? Or can we use the assessment test that we are currently using? To get a score of 80% or better?
Yeah, there's no template. We haven't created a template assessment. It's the training provider would create the assessment themselves based on the content and the topics that are covered as part of the training. So you probably want to have questions that are specific to those topics and content that you're covering as part of your classroom training.
So will this assessment test have to be downloaded? Will that be part of the data that we have to input?
The grade of the assessment?
That's the grade.
Yes.
Okay, and is there a template, when we go to enter our, or input our data for the training requirements, is there an online form that we can input it to, or are we scanning the information that we have?
No scanning. You're electronically submitting it through the TPR site. So you're filling in the information as it's presented and then submitting it.
Fantastic. One more question.
Yep.
The hours, when we have students come in without permits, we have class so that they can have the permits.
Sure.
These hours that we are spending on them to get their permit, these hours can be submitted as part of the theory training?
We have allowed that, is it? No change?
Jason?
Yes, that will remain the same. You have 32 hours behind the wheel, 28 hours of classroom, and we did allow you to use some of that classroom training, your learner's permit training.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yep, that's true.
My question is around the 48 hours that training needs to be updated by into the system. So what if training finishes Friday at 5 p.m. and Monday's a holiday? Is there some kind of a consequence or penalty if it doesn't get updated within the 48 hours?
It's in order to be in compliance with the federal rule, it should be done within that time frame. It wouldn't prevent it's not, if the driver can't get to the registry, so it wouldn't prevent them from, at that point, taking a test, but it should be done within the time frame that is outlined.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to prohibit the red, green check mark. What I think is, though, that'll be one of those things that'll be looked at, that if it's a repeated thing, that's going to get a visit as to, or in, I hate to say it, like if you were having this conversation with me and you said, oh, we've had this repeated problem, I'd say, do your test earlier. I mean, it would be like one of those type things that 5 o'clock may not be the right thing because of that instance. So I don't think there's going to be a hard fast, absolutely, it's going to, you try to upload it on that Tuesday, but if it's a holiday, it goes by business days. So the Monday might not even be considered a business day. That's the other thing. So, you do it on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, technically aren't business days, Monday. I don't believe the system is going to say, ooh, it's actually day 3 and it's a red check mark. I think it'll still accept it, but it'll probably, like many of our systems, it'll probably error off somewhere going like, hey, this person has done this before from an accounting standpoint.
So they're talking about the
The
state
scheduling?
police. They're talking about the state police scheduler, and is this going to impact, who's going to contact them? But everything's remaining the same, I believe.
Yeah, okay.
Everything's remaining the same. So once the information comes, I think your question is, once the information comes to us, how much longer is it going to take? I shouldn't think there'd be any length. It's all done electronically, I believe.
Yeah, so right now, I think we're booking out 2 to 3 weeks for road tests, but the entry-level driver training isn't going to affect the schedule. It's only, the schedule is still going to be the schedule, if there's availability or not. It's just when we're scheduling that one individual, we're checking that they took ELDT.
Level driver training or anything, or we're just going to accept everything the way it is?
You accept everything as the way it is, and then we just, only when we're scheduling the test will we know.
Okay, so you will continue to submit your application online, and you're submitting, and the trainer is signing that they've completed the hours of training, and then when it's time to schedule the test and everything, then they'll check everything on the entry-level driver training. But you should do everything as you're doing now, and make sure whoever's signing is on that provider's list, the training provider registry.
It's physical, we said it's physical and application to school bus.
Yes, so everything comes in together. The DOT medical physical card, the training, and the additional first aid credential, all of that will still continue to come as always.
No change.
I think they're afraid of...
Yeah, there's no change in current process, except for the fact that we are verifying at the time of scheduling a road test or scheduling a hazmat endorsement that someone has taken ELDT. Nothing else changes from the registry.
This is where we're saying, this is the difference between the state requirements. See, that's why I think when you're talking about instructors, other than like a slide that says what an instructor has to be, the key word here is this whole presentation's been provider, not instructor. So you kind of need to step back from what you normally see as your thing is like, oh, my instructor is my person who provides my training, who's registered with the state. You know, we've done all that. So that's why there's still the dual
remain the same.
systems.
Again, the only change is a training provider umbrella entity is registering for on the training provider registry. Someone from that training provider entity is entering trainee information once they're completed, and then the state RMV is verifying that the training has been completed.
Is there a certain amount of questions you want to get the 80%, like 20, 30, 40, 50 questions?
It should be what the trainer feels will indicate that someone understood and comprehended the topics and the content that were covered.
Are they going to look at those tests and say these questions are pathetic? If you don't like them, or are we going to get like a bad grade on our test? If you don't
No,
like
I mean, what we would do is we would look at what the requirement of that section would be and whether the questions actually address, that material to gain some type of knowledge from it. Because that's why there's no minimum amount of time, because there are certain topics that, as an individual or a corporation, company, person, you'll want to emphasize more, because as you look at some of the items in there, you'll go, this doesn't apply to us.
Cargo.
I mean, like cargo's in there. Even like in the passenger stuff, talks about cargo. Well, school buses really don't have cargo. So, but you might, but at some point you're going to have to address it as a topic. So that would be like one question, I would think. You wouldn't want to skip over it, because you want to say that at least if someone said, well, how do we know you actually covered all these topics? One would be A, the curriculum, and two would be then, some type of test like, oh, a number test question 55 references back to item A.
Wouldn't the permit test pretty much cover the theory training and the 80% assessment?
I'd say you're talking about the general knowledge permit test
Well,
and some of the endorsements. To some extent, but not fully. I would say there's other topics and content that you're covering that are above and beyond what we could as a base level, be putting together for permit questions.
There is a requirement currently over and above the tests that you take with the general knowledge passenger and school bus endorsement, that there should be a school bus test. That's separate from CDL. So you could include that, I would believe, to be their school bus test, to be the test acceptable at 80%. It has to cover everything required. And currently, you really should be doing that. Okay.
it's just looking over the curriculum, I was trying to make my plan, my training plan.
Yeah.
And a lot of info in there is
covered in permit studies.
Yeah, like I said, I think Rich said at the beginning of the presentation, but most of what these requirements, federal requirements, are you're meeting the state and federal requirements as it is now because you're certified with the state, you're providing training, applicants are coming through. So again, it's just making sure that, you know, what you're doing, you're just in line with what the federal regulations are. If there's something that was missing, just incorporate it into your training or your curriculum. Like I said, when I approve the curriculums for the CDL training schools because they're certified with us, I go, you know, they may have things in different order because that's how the trainer likes to train. It may have all the, you know, additional information that people might want to look at, or a video, or the state law. But again, I searched throughout to make sure I'm checking. I actually make copies of the regulation and check off this topic's been covered, this topic's been covered within people's own curriculums. So you can straight use the curriculum that's in the federal regulations, or you can create your own as long as it covers all the topics.
Okay, so when we enter all this information into the ELDT system, can we automatically, right after that, go into the registry of motor vehicles in Massachusetts and do that paperwork at the same time? Is this an automatic, the federal government's going to talk to the state?
When we schedule a road test. So at the time I'm scheduling a road test, I'm checking that the entry-level driver training has been done. So that's like the applicant, or if a sponsor calls on behalf of the applicant, then we would check at that point. So as long as the information's there, we move forward with the exam.
So for the record keeping, can I keep it all electronically, or do I have to maintain a paper folder for the 3 years? I can do everything electronically?
Absolutely.
Good answer. Thank you.
The only caveat I'll say with anything electronic is our regulations allow for it, but kind of like you've seen now, like with signatures, you know, like we have like IDs that actually have a digital signature versus a wet signature. So when something requires, say, a signature, you can't have someone do that, like type it, and it creates its own little thing. No, as long as if you have a paper copy, or, you know, like you're saying, the book, and then there's, you translate it or something to electronic, and that's representative, yeah, you can get rid of the files. Okay. It's no different than our agency. Pretty much we do everything electronic, and the key is before we can get rid of a piece of paper, I think it's now like we have to wait like 7 days till our backup systems make sure it's there, but then we get rid of it. We have no more file cabinets in our office. So, like I said, but the information we're able to retrieve is truly representative of the information that was originally generated. That's the key there. When you mention time frames, especially, you know, since we're talking about multiple agencies and with us, is a lot of times, and I know this is a specific item, but always double check with if there are other agencies that also use that information. And I'll use this like fuel tax records. We may say you can get rid of a document after 6 months or a year when you're using it for our purposes. The IRS may say you need to maintain that for 6 years because you used it for tax records. So before you go, oh, Rich told me I can get rid of everything in my Prius, just always double check that if you're utilizing it for 2 agencies or multiple agencies, that each agency has the same record-keeping requirement.
We can talk. Everything is electronic, and we did still maintain that sign-in book, but everything else is electronic. So it's just, we haven't changed the regulation. The regulation states that we have to have 2 methods of record keeping. We want it on the computer, so electronic is perfect. But the book is still there. It's just when they come to a group meeting, they're required to sign in, and that's why we still have the book.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That form that we're going to be using in putting our data online, that form, we're not registered yet with the training provider registry. We're going to be doing that this week. Would I be able to take a look at that form online somewhere, or do you have to be registered to access that form?
I don't think so. It's really going to be data fields that you're filling in. First name, last name, date of birth.
The 60 hours that school bus drivers need.
It may be,
Are you going to be inputting that all on one day, or do you have to do that every day?
oh no, at the end of the training, once they've completed theory behind the
Are
wheel.
we going to be inputting everything that they did, or is it just a number of hours?
It's not even the number of hours, it's the score on the assessment and that they've completed both behind the wheel and theory training.
But then we have to keep a record of that ourselves.
Yes.
At the site.
Yes, the hours.
3 years.
Yeah, that's a state requirement.
Thank you.
Yep. I'll let Margaret speak, but I just wanted to thank you. I feel like there's been a lot of good questions. I hope you're leaving here feeling as though it's not a crazy amount of change that you have to undergo. Register for the training provider registry, as soon as possible so you're done before the compliance date. And then the information that you enter, once the training's done, will be passed to the site, retained, and then as the registry of motor vehicles will be able to verify that. So more change, I think, for the driver too. They're looking to, everyone's role changes a little bit based on the entry-level driver training rule. But again, I think it seems like it should be manageable, and I know, your industry already is following probably most of what we've covered in terms of the training and what's included.
I don't know. I'm not going to take long. You want to go ahead.
No, I mean, I think we'll just skip that way.
So I'm not going to take very long. I can see a lot of you are leaving, anxious to leave. So I just want to mention, when you go for a road test with a certified instructor, you need to follow up with your applicant to make sure that they get their school bus certificate within a 2-week period. There seems to be a little delay, not always, but occasionally. And I've found a couple of people out there driving with no school bus certificate. So I'm putting it, I know everything goes through systems first and then into Atlas, and then it goes to Chelsea to be mailed. So I want to make sure if you don't have it within your applicant doesn't have it within 2 weeks, it's really important that you reach out to the licensing department and let us know. There's something we can do if we know about it. Okay?
How are we contacting them? Best is email, is that what you told me before? To contacting the licensing department?
Our RMV school bus, RMV school bus or me. I think you all have my contact information. And I also want to remind everybody that you can, once the CDL road exam is over, there's 2 things. Before the CDL exam, when you're called to schedule an appointment, if you wish to prepay, you can do that. I want to mention that. It may save time. And each time you go for the road test, there's a $35 fee. So the first test is $35, and each time, and hopefully not, if you fail, there's an additional $35. And at the end of it all, if you don't pay those fees, you can't get your CDL license, cannot. And you cannot get your school bus certificate. So you can also, after the test, apply online. It saves a trip. There's still people, I understand, that go to the customer service center, and that's not necessary. It can be done online. They can access their profile and complete and pay online, and there's no need to go to the customer service center. But keep in mind, every time you visit the test site, it's $35. Some people, I guess, still don't understand that. Just wanted to mention it.
Okay, I have a question about that too. Sorry, just this is happened to be at that time. If they prepaid already, they passed the test, and everything is already in the system, can they drive that day?
They can, well, first of all, it depends if you've prepaid. If you've prepaid, the permit is supposed to act as a license for 2 weeks. No, a little bit longer, I think. I know they get a temporary school bus certificate that day, which is good for 60 days. And so the permit is good for 60 days. It's only if it's prepaid. If it's not prepaid, then you can't, none of that applies.
Payment holds up the issuance of the license.
The payment holds up the issuance of the license.
So there's been people that haven't done the payment, and then they'll call like 3 months or 6 months later and say they never got their CDL and they're driving, and I'm like, well, you never got issued CDL, like, because you still have this $35 payment. So it's important to, that's a great reminder that Margaret brought up.
Well, no, because I didn't know about the CDL not being an issue, but I know about the school bus certificate. We have an accident, and I look up, and I said, there's no school bus certificate. When this is, it's not frequent, but does happen. So you need to pay attention to all of that. And there's one more final thing. We've had several serious accidents lately with pedestrians in the crosswalk. 2 of them turned out to be fatalities. And I'm thinking, what is going on here to suddenly have 3 of these? Actually, there were 4, but one was minor, the other one was seriously injured, and 2 were fatalities, all in the last few months since the start of school. So I'm urging all of you to please get out there and train. A little, don't wait for an accident to happen to have more training. I know you do a lot of training, but you need to review. You need to review right-hand turns, left-hand turns, student pickup and drop-off in terms of when children are crossing in front of your vehicle. Fortunately, none of them have been children. These have been pedestrians crossing the street. And remind your drivers, when it's dark and they have dark clothing, it's very difficult to see. So I just think a little more training on that part for everyone is really needed. And thank you very much. I'm all through here unless you have a question.
Margaret, quick question on how soon after someone that's newly CDL licensed passed the test and has paid $35 and had to go back, the registry sends out their CDL license, how soon after that do they get the school bus certificate?
I just said if you haven't received it in 2 weeks, something's not right. So we need to follow up. So I'm putting it on you to check with your applicant and make sure that within 2 weeks, they have the school bus certificate. As I said, there's 2 systems. The state police enter the score into systems. And then systems communicates with Atlas, and then it goes to a vendor in Chelsea and goes through U.S. Mail. And as we all know, U.S. Mail these days is not 100% accurate either. So 2 weeks, and you need to follow up, as an instructor, follow up with your applicant and make sure that they have their school bus certificate. And if they don't, you need to call us right away. And we'll issue right away.
Hi, Margaret. I have a gentleman that has a CDL already and is just going for his school bus certificate. Is he still required to do the 60 hours of training?
Well, all right, so if he has a CDL, we only require 40 hours of training. And it's up to, when it's 40 hours, we don't say 32 behind the wheel and 28 of classroom. We leave it up to the instructor as to where they need the most training.
Okay, anyone have any other questions? All right, thank you all for your time today. Appreciate coming out. Happy
Thank
New
you,
Year.
everyone.
Take care.
I want to thank Gretchen, Margaret, Rich, and a special mention Wayne.